The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, and a very warm welcome to everyone to today's webinar providing an update on Queensland street lighting. Before we get started, Paul, can you just let me know via the chat whether you can hear me and see the screen that says Queensland street lighting update?
Yes, I can, and let me do it via chat.
Cool, thank you very much, Paul. I'll just mute you again. So my name is Ronald Lee, and I'm Project Manager at Ironbark Sustainability. Today's other presenters are Paul Brown, Managing Director at Ironbark, and special guest Pam Bessette, Energy Management Coordinator at the City of Gold Coast. Before we get started, let's cover off on a few housekeeping issues, since I know for many of us this is our first webinar. First, note that only presenters can be heard during the presentation. During this webinar, if you have questions, you can type in the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel. If we run out of time, we'll follow up with a call to address any unanswered questions with people after this session. Please try to be as specific and clear as possible with your question. Note also that this webinar is being recorded and the link will be shared with the attendees after the webinar. All right, let's get started. Suffice to say, there's a lot going on nationally and internationally. In Australia, there are now 104 councils that have completed an LED changeover. This represents 16% of all lights and 23% of all residential lights or local road lights. There's a lot going on. There's still great opportunity in Queensland, and this morning's webinar will provide an update on the barriers, environment, and what councils can do to join the LED revolution. It is a very nuanced sector and requires a good understanding of a lot of technical, regulatory, financial, and relationship challenges, and that's what we'll get into in today's session. So here's the agenda for the next hour. We'll start off by providing some background and context on a national and international level, including the future of street lighting covering the impacts of the Minamata Convention and the future of commercial street lighting. Our special guest, Pam from the City of Gold Coast, will then present on the exciting actions Gold Coast is working on. We'll then drill down in more detail on the issues and opportunities for street lighting more broadly throughout Queensland. Finally, we will close off with what councils should be doing to move forward, and we'll end off with some question time. So a bit of a short introduction. This is us. We have a team of 20 staff, and we work with councils to try and reduce emissions and energy costs to ultimately improve sustainability outcomes. We don't make, maintain, or approve street lights, nor do we work for distribution businesses and utility companies. However, we do work with all stakeholders to plan for and deliver projects, but we only work for the benefit of councils and their communities. Since Ironbark started in 2004, we have assisted scores of local governments across Australia. The successes the councils have achieved has led to directly to thousands of tons of annual greenhouse gas savings. They're all there and open for you to see. You can find that information online. As you can see, as of December, 104 councils have completed an LED project. And of these councils, we've worked with most of them except for the ones that have been grayed out. We've got a counter on our website if you want to keep up to date. And as of early this week, around 423,000 lights have been replaced to LED. In the United States, according to the Department of Energy, about 13% of all street lights are now LED. And while there are examples of European, Asian, and Middle Eastern cities and jurisdictions implementing major projects, there is still a long way to go. So we'll run through a bit of an overview of the major players in the public lighting area across the country. There are very few differences in some respects from what the situation is in Queensland compared to the rest of the country. For all the eastern states, there is the same regulator and the same market operator. As you're all aware, in Queensland, Energex and Ergon now operate under the banner of Energy Queensland. In other states and other territories, it is a little bit different, but also quite the same. For example, in Victoria, there are 5 distribution businesses that are privately owned. New South Wales has 3 distribution businesses, which are majority owned by the state, much like in Queensland and Tasmania. In all these areas, each distribution business has their own patch and the regions do not overlap. State-owned or privately owned, we have found that this does not make much of a difference as far as the ability to get these projects over the line, which we will talk about later on. The same drivers that we see in Queensland are also there throughout Australia. Councils want to reduce costs and emissions. So a few years back, Ironbark was engaged by the federal government to develop the National Strategy on Street Lighting Energy Efficiency. As part of this work, we collated information on barriers to improve the efficiency of street lighting via a nationwide survey. We had 200 organizations respond. We found that the main barriers identified by councils were costs, most commonly capital costs, expertise, so the lack of technical expertise within councils and in dealing with the complexities of street lighting. And lastly, working with external stakeholders, in particular the lighting suppliers and distribution businesses. However, these barriers have progressively become less and less of an issue, with the prices of LEDs dramatically decreasing, and the energy savings making a strong business case for action. We are also seeing stronger support from the federal and state governments for these types of projects. And we have found again and again that the approach of collaborating and bringing all stakeholders to the table has proven to be successful. So as you might recall, when you registered for this webinar, you were asked if you were aware that mercury vapor lamps may be banned by 2020. So more than 3/4 of you are aware and the rest unsure or not aware. The Minamata Convention, of course, has significant impacts on councils. And this is the point now where I'll pass it on to Paul Brown to talk about the future of street lighting. Over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Ronald. Let me just get the screens showing. Okay, so we thought we'd do a quick around the country to give you a sense of the timing of technology changes. Ronald already mentioned the Minamata Convention, but you may not know about the other technologies nationally. So we're doing a quick run around. One of the smallest light types are T8s and low pressure sodiums. It's only around 2% of the lights nationally. And those lights are now in the situation where it's very, very difficult to get lamps for them. So wherever these lights are present, there's quite a lot in South Australia, for example, they're on their way out. So whenever a lamp fails, pretty much the light gets replaced. Mercury vapor, which is the one we're largely interested in, is around 40% of the lamps and lights that are around the country. As mentioned, the Minamata Convention means that it's highly likely they will be not available by 2020. Even if the Australian government does not sign the Minamata Convention, which is unlikely, all the options in the recent summary to the federal government included getting rid of mercury vapor lamps. Even if they're not, that's not signed by the Australian government, all the major suppliers of lamps have already signed it. So by 2020, the lamps will no longer be available. They won't be able to be imported into Australia if signed. What this means is that across the country, there's a lamp replacement program for mercury vapors, which it tends to be between 3 and 4 years. So for the 3 to 4 years post 2020, there won't be lamps unless stockpiled to replace those. Metal halide is one that is often used for key precincts. It's very common in sports lighting, for example, and also internal lighting. There's around 100,000 or so of those in street lighting. What we're finding is the lamp supply demand for metal halides is dropping off a cliff. Factories are closing and the supply of metal halide lamps is diminishing really quickly. We would expect that it'll be very difficult to find good quality, low cost metal halide lamps by 2020 to 2023. CFLs, there's quite a lot of these in Queensland. They're in a very similar situation to metal halides. Factories are closing, production lines are stopping, and so the cost and the quality are going in opposite directions. T5s are present in large volumes in certain states, not so much in Queensland. These lamps are the most common internal lighting lamp. So it's expected that those lamps will last a bit longer, probably by around 2030 or so. We'd expect that they also will be very difficult to source and find. I was at a forum earlier this week, and one council building management person said they're actually finding it very difficult to source T5 lamps now. So that may accelerate. High pressure sodium is the other main one other than mercury vapours, and this is mostly in major roads, around 30% of the lights across the country, and they're in a similar situation to T5s. There's still demand for them. There's still quite a lot of products. It's one of the most common products around the world. So we'd expect lamp supply to be available up until around 2030, which in effect leaves LEDs. There may well be other technologies that come through over the next 10, 15 years, but at this point in time, the vast majority of the investment and the development and the production is going into LEDs, and we'd expect this technology to be the leader for at least the next 10, 20 years. All right, so when I researched this first, probably 12 months ago, it was surprising because obviously the lamps are a critical part of the street light. And without having a replacement option for those lamps, it really does impact significantly on plans, both for distribution businesses, main road authorities, but especially councils, as to how they deal with their current stock of street lights. However, it isn't a surprise for the lighting businesses. So in 2016, Osram, GE, and Philips all worked hard to sell their lighting businesses. These three businesses all started. It was really a key part of their corporate business was selling lamps. And now all of them have got out either fully or partially from the lighting businesses and are doing other things. And that all happened last year. So they were clearly aware of what was going on and the impact of LEDs. All right, that's just a quick summary of lamps. Let's talk about smart lighting. So this is one of those things that it's a bit of jargon term, and we're not quite sure how to do it and what it means. So I'm going to give you a quick summary of where things are at with smart lighting. So in the ACT, Tasmania and the Northern Territory, smart lighting is able to be driven, I guess, by the councils because there's significant ownership of assets. In other areas, it's the distribution business driving that decision around what the smart lighting is. Most other areas, the distribution business is working closely with either main roads authorities and or councils on what the functionality it is that council's looking for. For example, most smart PE cells also have temperature sensors in them. And this is of strong interest to a lot of councils who are interested in things like urban heat, how to manage suburbs that are getting hotter and hotter and hotter. And so having on-pole temperature sensors that tell you exactly what the temperature is at a micro level is of strong interest. And that's not even to do with controlling the lights themselves. All right. One of the things it's worth keeping in mind about smart lighting is that we're now moving into the territory of information technology providers and multinational conglomerates who see really big opportunities for their business models in smart cities. Smart cities is essentially a process where different sensors on bins or lights, and then there's a communication network to send information through to software. And so they are jockeying. There's various providers currently who have the communication network available for smart cities infrastructure, and there's almost every single lighting provider is working hard or has already developed the control and the software system. Ultimately, the challenge for local governments is making sure that the smart lighting process that is delivered and how it's negotiated and worked through is of benefit to their communities. And the only way really to do that is to work closely with all the different stakeholders, whether that's a distribution business or technology providers, and have that front and centre, what is the benefit, questioning what it is, and ensuring as far as possible that we're not creating a closed market. All right, let's go a bit wider. What about by 2050? Will there actually be a distribution system in residential areas? Will each house instead have enough solar panels and batteries to be self-sufficient, or there's mini grids across suburbs? Will there be standard electricity poles, which essentially subsidise for us as councils the hosting of our street lights? Will there be car parks anymore? This is a real example of a council who's essentially turning a car park into a park. With the rise of autonomous vehicles, it's expected that the demand for car parks will be significantly lower because the cars will keep moving and move to where they're able to be or pick someone else up. By 2050, will we be doing what's happening in the UK, turning a lot of our lights off? Obviously, that relies on and requires smart controls. What's absolutely going to be the case is whatever we are doing needs to be driven by that community benefit piece. And understanding the value of the community benefit of lighting is really important to making decisions over the next 5 or 10 years in preparation for some of these changes. What we're also seeing is the rise of the smart pole, which potentially does anything you can think of in terms of electricity and lighting. It can have Wi-Fi, it could have electric vehicle charging, and the opportunities for you to choose your own adventure there is well proven now. We're seeing more and more in key precincts that's actually being implemented and delivered by some councils. All right, so what should you do about smart controls and smart lighting now? Well, given the time frame and the acceleration of the decline of lamps, it's important to actually focus on that first. So asset stranding is a key driver there. And so having a plan in place and understanding the numbers and your options around how you deal with that asset stranding is critical. Smart lighting is also critical. However, it's less time pressures compared to dealing with the lamps. So we would recommend that councils focus on the first, whilst when council commits to a pathway, whatever that is, do nothing is still a pathway. Then within the projects or the delivery that occurs post that, you look seriously at smart lighting and smart cities generally, and how is it that you can engage with the relevant stakeholders? What are the key outcomes you want to achieve and deliver for your community? All right, I'm now going to handball over to Pam Bessette. Pam is the Energy Management Coordinator at the City of Gold Coast and has been very active in working on street lighting for a number of years. Pam, I think I am going to control your slides. So if you can let me know when you want me to change them, that'd be awesome. Do you want to jump in, Pam, see if we can hear you? All right, I think we might be having a little bit of technical difficulties. Might just swap it over to Ronald. So Ronald can be the presenter here. Can you see if you can get Pam online, Ronald? All right. I think we're still struggling with the sound. What I might actually do is continue with my slides. Ronald, are you happy to work with Pam to see if you can get her talking offline?
Hi, Paul.
Feel free to...
Sorry about that. Yep, we'll get Pam to dial in a bit later to speak to her slides. So could you please go to Queensland background? Thank you.
Yes, I will. Thank you. All right, so we're going to skip past Pam's slides and then come back once we've got her online. All right, I think you might need to pass me. There we go. All right. Now you'll see all my things on my desktop, including the Queensland background. All right, so what we're going to do now is talk a little bit about, instead of the high level national and international perspective, we're going to talk a little bit about public lighting in Queensland specifically. And I know a lot of you will have an intimate understanding of some of these issues, so please excuse me if I go over ground that you're aware of. Let's start with who does what. So council and DTMR are responsible for providing public lighting, and that means they're responsible for the lighting levels in order to make roads safe. Energy Queensland own the majority of the infrastructure, the lights, the poles and wires, and essentially councils pay Energy Queensland to maintain and manage these lights.
I'm the organiser. Okay, so I'll go into another meeting room now and try this again.
I can hear you, Pam, just so you know.
Oh, sorry.
No problem. I'll keep chugging along and I'll jump back to you when you're settled down. So feel free to talk over the top of me when you're ready. All right. Council and DTMR pay the energy to a retailer, and the majority of lights are the types that we talked about earlier. So not LEDs, but mercury vapors, sodiums. There's not so much low pressure sodium. There haven't been any bulk changeovers in Queensland that are more than 10,000 lights. So we tend to LED. We tend to talk about bulk as in large. There have been projects that have been done in certain councils that we'll talk about in a minute, but that's the current status. One of the big things that there's been significant work done by Sunshine Coast Council is on understanding the options around ownership and seeking an alternative maintenance provider. So this is a really tricky area and I'm going to skim through it quickly, but feel free, I'm happy to chat afterwards, and I'm sure there's people from Sunshine Coast who can also provide more detail. Sunshine Coast put out a tender for the management of street lighting in 2012. Post that tender, they appointed a company called CityLume, which is a subsidiary company of a very large French multinational company. And over the last 4 years or so, CityLume and Sunshine Coast have been working with Energex around the transfer of street lighting assets. So in order to appoint an alternative provider, the process there was essentially to buy the assets back, the streetlights, poles, wires, etc., and that took a lot of time to work through. One of the other things that was happening at the same time, which happened much more recently, was that the compact, I'm going to get this wrong now, the Southern Queensland group of mayors put out a smart street lighting feasibility report. Now, all of the councils in Southeast Queensland were involved in that, and that report essentially said we should work together as a group of councils to take back the ownership of the lights so that we can create an awesome system which has smart lighting, connects to smart cities, LED lighting, and has a maintenance provider that we want to choose. That was put out in late 2016, that report. Recently, in 2017, this is from the LGAQ website, Energy Queensland responded to that and responded to LGAQ's request to buy the street lighting network and assets. Energy Queensland CEO said, I see streetlights as an asset that will remain with Energy Queensland. LGAQ then said that brings to an end their formal bid to buy or lease the street lighting network. Now, one of the things that's important to note here is, as the assets are currently owned by an energy distributor, the organisations that have power to, I guess, strip those assets off the distributor are either the state government or obviously the distributor can choose to sell the assets. Councils don't have a right, I guess, to take those assets off the distributor. So this is a reasonably clear line in the sand. It's looking nationally, this is a really common response. This is what's happened in Victoria, South Australia, and New South Wales. In some of the areas, like Tasmania, the Northern Territory, that has the distributor's been happy to either gift or sell the assets. But in any of the larger states where there's lots of lights, the distributor hasn't, certainly to this point, looked to sell and pass them on. The other thing that's useful to note is that CityLum Australia, post that, deregistered and have decided to continue their business offshore, but not in Australia. All right, so where are we at now? Based on all that back history, there's a few things to note. The Department of Main Roads are currently putting LEDs in and have been for quite some time. This picture here is the Smithfield roundabout on the Captain Cook Highway in Cairns, and it's one of the current roundabouts, I guess, or locations where the lights are going to be replaced with LEDs. And this has been an ongoing program for a while. The focus has been on main road lighting, so it's fair to say that Queensland is a leader nationally on main road LEDs. And the Department of Main Roads has really been driving that. In terms of Energy Queensland now, there are LEDs that are approved, however, there isn't a process currently which enables councils to do a bulk rollout, so to change every single light in your municipality or 50% or whatever it is. There is work being done by the Australian government to bring to the table Energy Queensland councils and Department of Main Roads to work through these issues, particularly in light of the lamp replacement issue by 2020. So there's definite dialogue and working forward on trying to get this moving. And 2018 will be quite a big year in terms of negotiation and delivering. And Pam will have more to say shortly. The City of Gold Coast and Brisbane are working very closely with Energy Queensland. We'll hear from Pam in a sec. Brisbane have promised, the Mayor has promised, that they will replace 40,000 of their streetlights to LEDs by 2020, which is the sort of scale that's actually required to deal with the asset stranding issue we mentioned earlier. There are, I mentioned the Australian government, there are a lot of other councils that are also very active and watching closely. And we'll talk about that a little bit further shortly. All right, I might actually jump back now. I'll finish this slide and then I'll jump back and we'll grab Pam. All right, so in terms of Queensland, so I showed the national numbers before. These are what the Queensland numbers are. So mercury vapour is around 50%, metal halo is very small, CFL is bigger, so close to 10%, and a lot of those CFLs are in Brisbane, and then high pressure sodiums is the remainder. So the bulk really is mercury vapours and high pressure sodium. It's a fairly simple portfolio of lights, and so the technical strategies are quite straightforward. And then obviously we're going back to LEDs. All right, I'm going to jump back up now to Pam. Let me change presenter now. And we'll just make sure you'll need to unmute yourself, Pam. And then you can go for it. Awesome.
Okay. Apologies everyone for the earlier technical issues. Trying to work on a smart city, but we can't get computers to work. First of all, thank you, and I hope everyone's having a great morning, but I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Paul and Ronald for allowing me to tell you all about our LED retrofit partnership arrangement with Energex. I believe some of you may know about this, but I'll give you some high-level information anyway. Basically, just over a year ago, we started communication with Energex to look at how we could manage our streetlights in a more of an energy savings and maintenance, and looking at smart lighting and how we can progress forward. We wanted to have a relatively small area, but we really wanted to test the smarts capability. So, and also see if we could bring in any kind of regulatory change. So what we did is we selected a fairly high profile area that consisted predominantly of rate 3s and metered lights, because we wanted to look at the smarts capability. We wanted an area that had some security issues. It was subjected to marine considerations, and had a fairly high commercial and public scrutiny about that area. So we felt that if we selected an area such as Surfers Paradise, which is the hub of the Gold Coast, that if we could make it there, basically we could make it anywhere in the Gold Coast, because we have all of those elements that we had to deal with. So this particular area, if any of you are familiar with Surfers Paradise, it's about a 1.5 by half of a kilometre area. It is from Trickett to Higman, from north and south, and along the Esplanade to River Drive, and you can see it in the slide there, the project area. The dots are predominantly our rate 3 lights, and then we have rate 1s and 2s scattered throughout, and some metered lights. The project consisted of approximately 890 street and public lights, P and V category, and we had rates 1, 2, 3, and metered lights in there. So what our key drivers, again, for this particular project was really to understand the energy savings. I mean, there's a lot of literature out there that talks about 50% consumption. So we really wanted to be able to collect the data to verify and validate that. We wanted to see what the maintenance savings were. Again, literature states it's about approximately 50%, but we really wanted to understand how that actually works in terms of reducing the number of truck rolls, and seeing if we could do some remote monitoring, maintenance and testing, etc. We wanted to look at overall cost savings with a new tariff model. As you know, we don't have an LED tariff model, which is we're working with Energex on right now. We wanted to engage the AER, AEMO, the NMI, all of the different regulatory bodies, and basically give them a complete open book of what we're doing and all the data that we're collecting, and all the changes that we're making and modifying the output on these lights. So we are working with all those regulatory bodies to talk to them and give them that information to try and affect some kind of change, or at least push it along a lot faster than what's happening now. And obviously, you know, you have the safer roads with the white light and instead of the amber. But one of the things that we were really keen on, we have a digital city program area here in the city of Gold Coast that are progressing quite well, and with fibre across the city, we've got a few gateways now across the city. So in order to have, you know, utilise the streetlights as a backbone, we really needed to kind of progress this particular project and have that always in the back of our minds. And then we also wanted to integrate any type of our nighttime enhancements with ambience, entertainment, that type of thing. We wanted to make sure that we included that in our overall project, and obviously the environmental areas as well. So how we look at have all the environmental considerations. The scope of works. So the scope of works included, we didn't actually go out to market just for a hardware and software solution. We actually wanted an overarching solution. So something that looked at the LED retrofit, that looked at the software component, but also that integrated, as I mentioned, other, you know, coloured RGB floodlights and all those other smarts into this particular project. So using lighting as a solution for a myriad of different applications, and not just an LED retrofit. The scope of works also included visual inspection of existing infrastructure, because some of our infrastructure is quite old. So we wanted to know what all that infrastructure actually, what our assets actually look like. There was a design element, technical detail installation, LEDs obviously with 7-pin NEMAs, and that is what we're asking for across the city. We are no longer accepting any other type of luminaire. We are only accepting LEDs with a 7-pin NEMA. That's the policy moving forward. And we're looking at obviously deployment of smart nodes and software. So one of the things in this deployment of smart nodes, what we decided to do in the city, because we all talk about you know, different, whether it's a LoRaWAN or Zigbee, and the maturity of both systems, and you know, whether you look at a star versus a mesh, what we decided to do, because we didn't know which one was really better, because it's still very new in Australia, we decided to run 2 separate trials concurrently. So we're trialing the Zigbee platform as well as the LoRaWAN. Now, the City of Gold Coast is working off the LoRaWAN for other applications at the moment, but because this has a mechanical element, because you can actually, you know, mechanically, you know, turn lights on and off, a lot of the other smarts is telemetry. It's all data collection. But because ours has that mechanical element, we just didn't know how it would perform under the existing LoRaWAN network or platform that we're using right now. So hence we've gone with the two different platforms, the two different trials, to see which one in actuality is performing better and where we will get the better results in terms of having that mechanical element, but also the telemetry and how that kind of integrates with the rest of the digital city platform within council. So here you can see the results of the program. These are live results, so you can see the before and after for the Esplanade. We've had absolutely fantastic feedback, and but you can see the difference between the amber and the white light, as well as Paradise Place at Budds Beach. We're very happy with those results. We haven't to date. We've just completed, so we've just finished this project, but to date we haven't received any complaints or requests for shields. We haven't seen anything negative come through. In actual fact, we've only received positive feedback in terms of people commenting on the fact that they can run along the beach at night time now, and they feel safe. The light is not trespassing into their front yards. The light doesn't have any upward glare into the apartment buildings. So we're only hearing some really positive feedbacks. There was the complaint that we never received in council, but the installer received some on site while he was working, and somebody came out and said, you know, you're making too much noise, stop it. But they just said, look, we're doing this, we'll be out of here in 15 minutes. They wanted to complain to the mayor and the prime minister, and this was just before the state election, so we just said, okay, sure, go ahead. but that complaint was never received to council. So we're claiming that as a zero complaint to council, and but we're quite happy with the results. And if you come down to the Surfers Paradise, you'll see it's quite good. So what's next for us here? We have actually put a proposal to Energy Queensland Limited. It has gone through their ELT. The first pass through has been accepted unanimously, and what that is basically asking them to be able to have the opportunity to lease their poles. And I know Sunshine Coast has gone down this path, but what we've said, we don't want to own the poles. We don't want to change anything to the ownership structure. We don't want to transfer risk. We don't want to do any of that. All we want to do is basically have an MOU, which we have one right now, but we want that MOU to allow us to generate revenue. And so because the City of Gold Coast has a telecommunications license, we have first rights to refusal for our assets. So what we want to be able to do is basically sell the assets, or the space on the pole, on the asset, through a master asset agreement and through another agreement, an asset condition agreement, whereby all revenue generated goes to council for council. And that revenue is then used to upgrade the lighting. And that way, EQL or Energex do not have to try and fund the upgrade to LED. We will fund that via that revenue. So we're still in the process. We've still got a couple of hurdles to go, and we've now have a few more hurdles with some of the issues within the telecommunications industry. So we're slowing that down a little bit, just whilst we understand what's happening with the telecommunications industry, but we'll still continue on and see if in fact we can do a lease, which equals revenue, which equals upgrade. So watch this space, and we'll let you know how we progress in that area if that is achievable. The next thing we're working on is an LED tariff. We have the tariff model that EQL actually use right now. So we're running a few scenarios on there where we've contacted a number of different distribution companies around the world, and we've asked them for their model, which they've been very, very good with, and they've provided some of their models and different case studies and some of the other work that they've done globally. So we're using all of that information to come up with what we would want to pay, or how we would actually like the LED structure to look like. And then obviously metering the unmetered, and that's working with the National Metering Institute and others to effectively utilize the metering ability that the LED lighting provides, and seeing if the retailers will come on board to bill per that meter in order to instead of just doing as they do right now. So that's where what we're working on with EQL and a lot of the other regulatory bodies, and that's why with this particular project we've opened up the books. Basically, they have a copy of everything that we do. Anytime there is a change or anything, everything is recorded, so that way they can see exactly how we're changing lights, whether we dim, whether we enhance, what times we do it, whether it is whether it is on a sensor, a timer, etc., etc. There are some areas where we will actually switch off lights. There are some areas where we will enhance lights, we will dim lights. So all of that information will be provided to the regulatory bodies as a supportive argument to move forward. And that's it from me.
Awesome, Pam. That's very interesting background, and I think we'll all want to hear a lot more about how you progress in 2018.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. Are you able to, in your control panel, change the presenter back to me?
Okay. Sure. Paul Brown. Okay.
All right. Excellent. Now, there will be question time at the end. If we don't answer all the questions that you put in the question box, we will email responses around to everyone. So feel free to pop any questions you've got in there. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about what other councils should be thinking about, and what the standard process is to look at bulk replacements in particular. All right, so as Ronald mentioned, there's over 100 councils who have already delivered large-scale LED changes. And this is the standard process that they've gone through. This is a pretty standard project delivery and management framework. And I'll just talk a little bit about each one of those. So in the preparation stage, it's very much about getting the numbers together and doing a business case, understanding what it is that Energy Queensland allows in terms of tariffs, technologies, etc., and then putting those numbers together. And it's really so that you can put the right information in front of your council for them to consider what their options are. Examples of these have been done in Brisbane, Gold Coast and Moreton Bay. The scenarios that were looked at obviously consider things like the rate, so what the current rate is, what the future rate might be, what the implementation period, and whether you're just looking at residential, which is where the majority of the mercury vapours are, or major roads as well, and also smart controls and dimming. Some of the options that were considered last year are now no longer on the table, as we've heard, in terms of the taking ownership approach. However, there are others opening up, as Pam has just outlined. These scenarios here, I think there was 8 or thereabouts, gives you a range, an example of the different cost benefits of each of those. The reason the ranges of these were so large is there's a lot of uncertainties in terms of both capital cost and also how the maintenance savings will be delivered going forward. And some of those issues are being unpacked now, as we've heard. All right, the second stage is getting money, essentially. There are options to get finance for these projects. These projects usually have a payback, which means that you can fund it through essentially an operating approach where you get finance from somewhere else and then pay it back out of the savings. There is funding available for these projects through the Emissions Reduction Fund through the federal government. It's not a lot of money, but that is one of the options for Queensland councils. Other councils in other jurisdictions have also sourced funding for these projects through Roads to Recovery. One of the councils in Tasmania have replaced all of their lights, 100% funded by the Roads to Recovery program. Roads to Recovery is one of those areas where usually most councils have a 5-year or more program already in place of where they want to spend the money. So it's a competitive area to get funding from, but it is available. Within the Smart Cities Plan, which is also a federal government initiative, there has been grant funding provided for smart cities stuff generally. Again, this is highly competitive and is a possibility, but a much lower possibility than those other examples I've already given. The vast majority, I'll just jump back, the vast majority of councils who deliver these projects have simply got it through their operating budgets or got it as a capital project. So source the money themselves, and that can be through loans, but that's in the mix with all the other projects councils could do. The one last one I'll mention is often the distributor can essentially do a loan type funding as well, where they have a structure where they're funding it and then they recruit that over time. The interest rate that they charge is much higher than what you can get through a loan type approach, but it is a simpler method. All right, stage 3 is then, once you've got the money and it's been approved by your council, is getting down to the detail of the project and what it is you exactly want to do and making sure you're communicating. This picture here is an example of a council who wanted to engage with the police on areas where there was high levels of crime, but also traffic accidents and things like that. So they wanted them in the room to talk about and consider what the project is going to deliver. Within the design plan process, it is standard to consider things like vehicles, public transport, and also congested areas. And obviously, as mentioned, traffic accidents. So you may want to choose to increase lighting levels in certain areas. depending on what the conflict from the different road users are. During this stage, it is now common to consider how are you going to deal with smart lighting. The base level is a lower level than what Pam outlined, which is essentially just to keep a NEMA cell, NEMA base, which means you can retrofit a smart controller later. And that's the most common approach that councils have done. Some other councils are now starting to put smart controllers in, but that's less common currently. The fourth stage is procuring, which either means going to the market or it means engaging with the distributor. The fundamental outcome is getting the best price for the project. Where the distributor wants to do the project and doesn't let you go to the market, then the main approach is benchmarking to make sure the prices they're providing are within the benchmarks of the contestable approaches nationally. So there's enough projects and examples now that we know what a contestable price is for these projects. During that procurement process, in our experience, has generally saved around 15 to 30% of capital costs from the first proposal, I guess, that distributors put up. And that's a fairly, once they've done it once and everyone knows, then those savings tend to carry through to future projects and future councils. Though it's certainly one of those things you've got to keep an eye on. Then the last stage is actually doing it and managing it, checking it, finalising, doing all the communications and reporting, etc. And it's actually the easiest stage of all of the stages, except for the people who are delivering the project. But from a council engagement and council officer perspective, the managing and delivering is the easiest part of the project. All right, now, in terms of next steps, if I was a council, I'd certainly be looking at putting information in front of your council as soon as possible, you know, in 2018, to understand what your options are, the potential capital costs and benefits from the different approaches. 2018 is a good year for preparing, given the timeline of lamps. You certainly want to know what your options are and have made a decision prior to 2020. And this goes for all councils in Queensland. Statewide, as mentioned, there is progress occurring in certain areas, and there is ongoing dialogue between the main players on how to resolve some of these issues, like LED maintenance prices, like how does the bulk replacement project roll out? Obviously, the options that Pam was talking about and how they work and how they can be replicated in other council areas. That work is happening, and there's a number of other councils who are very involved in understanding the detail of LEDs, smart controls, etc. There's a lot of knowledge within the state around the different options from a technical perspective. But again, that the left-hand side of your screen is really needs to work hard next year so that there's a clear pathway for councils with options, costed options on how the projects can be delivered. The do nothing approach is essentially Energy Queensland goes out and replaces everything, and they decide how the smart controls work, and they decide how much it costs, what the capital costs are and the maintenance costs. As shown earlier, this isn't a good outcome for councils. You definitely want to be proactive in promoting what your preferred outcomes and options are. All right, I'm going to handball back over to Ronald, and we'll take any questions that you've got now. As mentioned, if we don't get to all of the questions, we will jump back and send them via email. Can we hear you, Ronald?
Unmuted.
All right, thank you, Paul. So we've got about 5 minutes left for questions, and there have been about 5 questions come through. So the first question, and I think this one's for you, Paul. Are there any new light producing technologies on the horizon?
As mentioned earlier, LEDs are certainly the main game, where what we're finding is that there's a small number of product providers who are consistently winning contracts, and they're using that development, I guess, to improve their products. So we're seeing reducing energy over time and reducing costs as well. However, the main providers of that, there's probably 3 or 4 main providers are well ahead of any of the other international providers because they've designed lights which are relevant to Australian conditions. So from a technology perspective, LEDs are getting better and better and better. 3 years ago, for a 150 watt sodium replacement, we were talking about 120 watts of power. Now we're talking about 70. As time progresses, they'll get better and the costs will come down, which obviously improves the business case for everyone. In residential areas, the LED wattages, I guess, have come down from around 30 watts and they're now sub 20, so 15 to 20 watts. It's unlikely they will get lower than, say, 10 watts. And just to put it into context, we're comparing that to, say, 60 or nearly 100 watts for the current light. So we're not going to get significant improvement in wattage in residential areas compared to what we currently have. But the cost is dropping rapidly and is dropping from the main roads as well. One thing I will just mention, though, is that some councils have decorative lights or fancy lights which don't have a standard LED replacement. And there is work happening currently with 1 or 2 manufacturers on an LED lamp, which looks promising. We have heard about LED lamps for a long time, and they've been generally not very good for replacement into our streets. But we are seeing now a couple of quality products that will be well priced, and they're especially good for those types of lights which are hard to replace, where you just need a lamp replacement option. So that's probably one of the more recent things that we're seeing is lamp technology.
All right, thank you very much, Paul. We've only got 3 minutes left, so probably time for one more question. And the rest, like we said before, we'll get back to you by email or phone call. So this question is, what is LGAQ's role now in all of this? Could be one for Paul, and Pam, you can chime in as well.
Maybe I'll quickly jump in and then Pam can add if she wants. So in the forum that was set up by the federal government in September, there was definitely discussion around who should be in the room to negotiate things like tariff costs and process, etc. And the clear consensus was it should be a coalition of people who are interested in progressing things forward together. I think LGAQ was invited to all of those meetings, and it's really up to them, I guess, how they want to progress that. There are forums and opportunities for them to be involved if that's something they want to do. Anything from you, Pam?
I guess with LGAQ, they did, I think they initiated a new team or something, or a new area called Sherlock, Team Sherlock. And that's really to push forward the smart city agenda. So in terms of pushing forward any kind of advocacy or push with the state government or the EQL, I think that's going to be, as you said, Paul, a collective of councils. But I don't necessarily think that is going to be a push that we're going to see LGAQ entertain or help us. I mean, we've been progressing as the City of Gold Coast. I know we have been progressing quite well with EQL, as I believe Brisbane have as well. So, yeah, I think it's going to be one of those things that EQL will start working with different councils and seeing what options are available and which one's best for all parties, as opposed to having a single push just for ownership, because I don't think the ownership debate is going to get us across the line.
No, totally agree.
Yeah. But that's all for me.
All right, thank you, Pam and Paul. I think we've got to wrap it up now because we are just about 1 minute from 11. So So thank you very much, Paul and Pam, for attending and presenting. Here are Paul and my contact details should you want to get in touch or talk street lighting. We would be happy to assist. And so we have to wrap it up. Can I say a special thanks to Pam for taking the time to share experience and knowledge? It has been really useful to hear what the City of Gold Coast is doing and how they are approaching this. And also a very big thank you to all who have attended today's webinar. I hope you have found this valuable. As mentioned at the start, we'll follow up any unanswered questions over the next few days, and a link to this recording will be sent out to the attendees, and we'll send a notification email to you when it becomes available. Take care and have a good week. Thank you.
Thank you.